Welcome to the complete ball python care guide. Today I'm going to be going over everything you need to know to keep your ball python happy and healthy. Now, I actually made one of these exactly 1 year ago. Complete coincidence that is falling on the exact same day. But over the past year, I've learned a lot and gained a lot of my own experience, so this is the updated version. No need to watch the other one, but if you're coming here from that, welcome to the updated version. So I'm here with my two ball pythons. I'll go ahead and put Sunny, the larger one, back so that I can get the enclosure set up and show you everything for this little guy right here. So a quick introduction on ball pythons. I think they are amazing beginner animals or beginner reptiles. Some people say they're not the best because they do get a bit larger and they can sometimes be a bit difficult, but I think if you do have an interest in them and you are dedicated to caring for it, then you're going to be completely fine with your animal as long as you've done the research. They're very slow moving animals, very easy to handle, and the enclosure really isn't going to be that large, but we can go ahead and start talking about the actual sizes of the homes that they'll be put in. Now, lots of people are going to give you different answers on this. If you really wanted to, you could start your ball python in a 10-gallon if it's the very smallest size, but they're going to very quickly need an upgrade to 20. So I would say just skip the 10 and go directly to a 20 or something larger. Adult ball pythons can potentially be in a 20 forever. I don't suggest it. For a full size, I would suggest something like a 30 to 55 plus gallon enclosure. You might be thinking, lots of people say that enclosures can be too big. What are my thoughts on that? I really don't think that you can exceed a certain size limit with ball pythons. If you really wanted, you could put them in a 100-gallon enclosure, but the problem is it's going to be really difficult to maintain this, and you have to keep in mind that they enjoy small spaces. This is one of the reasons lots of people say that you should put them in very small tubs or racks, and although this can work, that's a small space and not small spaces. If you do something in a much larger enclosure, you can make multiple small spaces to make the ball python feel safe, while at the same time giving it lots of space to explore and find those other areas it can go to. This also helps with the temperature gradient, because you're going to want the temperature to change around the enclosure so the snake can actually thermoregulate or change its body temperature because they are cold-blooded, but we'll get more into that later. Also, everything I'm talking about is available in a link in the description, or you can just go to goherping.com/ballpythons, where I have a complete written out care guide with everything I'm going to be talking about and much more there. You can go to that anytime in the video or afterwards, and I also have links to a kit with everything that you're going to need to set up your ball python's enclosure. Using that list with all of the supplies will help make sure you actually have everything that you need. And if you buy stuff through those links, they go to Amazon links, I actually get a small commission for that. So it's a great way to support the channel. But let's go ahead and move on to the substrate for this enclosure, because it's time to go ahead and set this thing up. I'm gonna go ahead and put him to the side so we can focus on this. So options when it comes to different substrates, it really just seems to be endless. There's so many different substrates you can pick from. The ones I suggest, however, are substrates that can hold a little bit of moisture and keep the humidity up, because ball pythons do need higher humidity or moisture in the air than other snakes. We'll get onto that later. But the two that I suggest most often are the ZooMed Eco Earth or another sort of coconut fiber substrate. These are readily available and easy to find in lots of places, but again, I have them linked below. So this Eco Earth or coconut fiber is great for the ball python because one, it does not cause impaction, which I've talked about in other videos. I also have that linked below. Two, it can hold a bit of moisture without being too damp, which means it really helps with humidity. And three, it is a loose substrate, so if they really wanted, they can move around and burrow in it. It also just looks really nice. Then what I like to do is mix this Eco Earth with something called cypress mulch. I also buy this from ZooMed. It's called the ZooMed Forest Floor Substrate. The substrate I get asked about most often with ball pythons is aspen. This is a wonderful substrate for a lot of species of animals. However, I highly do not suggest it for ball pythons because I used it in the past. It was one of the first types I used, and my ball python just kept getting stuck in shed. But as soon as I switched that substrate out and got everything settled, it was much easier and he did not get stuck in shed anymore. The second ball python, which was actually rehomed to me, when they brought me that animal, he was in an enclosure with aspen. So the first thing I did was replace that aspen, get him out of his stuck shed, and next time a shed came around, he had no issues whatsoever. So when I do use aspen, I get it from ZooMed, and yes, there is a ball python on the cover. And although in very rare cases it can work out, you're gonna have just so much more luck with other substrates because the aspen cannot hold moisture, and if you do spray it, in my experience, it gets moldy and gross and sticks together. It's really good for desert animals. Keep it for more low to moderate humidity wanting or loving animals, for example, Kenyan sand boas. So let's go ahead and pop this enclosure open, which reminds me you have a lot of different options with these enclosures. Again, this is a 20-gallon long, and it comes, if we can get it out, it comes with a latching top. It's important that you somehow get the enclosure to latch completely, because ball pythons are strong and they will push a top off. Even if you have an aquarium style with just a lifting off lid, get some little clips that you can find at pet stores, but I also have those linked below. You can just clip them to the side and it keeps the animals from pushing it off. But this is a sliding one, so we can go ahead and take it off, and I'm gonna put my substrates in here. Right here is the Eco Earth. I'm just gonna go ahead and dump some out. And then the forest floor, just have a little bit left, but it should be enough. Something else you might be wondering is how much substrate should you actually put in here? Well, ball pythons really aren't burrowing animals, and you actually will see a lot of people that use things like newspaper and paper towel with their animal since they don't require a burrowing substrate, and those do often work out just fine, but they don't look too great, and they're not always the easiest for good humidity. So hey, you can kind of just make an estimation on what you think looks right. Keep in mind that the more substrate you put, the more difficult it will be for heating to get up through the bottom of this, which we'll get onto later. But basically, just doing what you think looks good. I'd say for a young one, maybe do like an inch or two, and then if it does get larger, you can probably go up to even more. In my larger ball pythons enclosure, I have about 4 to 6 inches of substrate in there, but that's because I have a lot of plants, and I'm not going to be putting any plants in this build. But substrates to avoid, I did a full video on this if you want to watch it, on the actual reasons that I don't suggest the following substrates, but I'll just go over the list quickly. First being cedar, second being pine, third being anything with walnut, and fourth being anything with sand, whether that's normal sand or calci sand, which is actually worse. But if you do care about the reasons behind those, I have that video linked below. Next up, let's just talk about hiding places. I've just got this simple small hide right here. Your ball python, like I said, they do love small spaces. The more small spaces, the better, because like I said, they can explore. They have different options, different temperature things, and everything like that. Right now, I only have one hide for them, but I can't always get them more. And I'm gonna go ahead and put this on the same side that I'm going to want my hotspot. It's important to keep that in mind. You can always shift stuff around, but you're going to want the main hide wherever you're gonna have the highest temperatures, but we'll learn how to do that soon. Try and pick out a hide where the snake can fit completely, but feel nice and secure. So basically as small as it can be with it still fitting. Not a huge deal if it's too big because they are usually going to grow. Hopefully it's gonna grow. So just estimating something that it can fit in and feel secure in. Some people don't suggest the log ones because they have light coming in on both sides, because they will feel a bit safer in darker areas. I haven't had any bad experiences with this, but if you do want to keep that in mind, you can maybe look for something that just has one opening in the front, but both have worked for me. Next up, let's talk about water. Firstly, the water bowl, pretty simple thing. Really what you should keep in mind is you want a bowl that the snake can fit in, but can also get out of easily. Although they can hold their breath for a long time, they can drown just like many other animals. So right now, this teeny tiny one, it's just fine for the little ball python, but you're gonna need some bigger ones. So I could go ahead and get them a larger one. I'll just keep this for now though. Heavier bowls I found are better because your snake cannot spill it or knock it over. Even if you are just using something like a simple plastic Tupperware, just stick a stone in it or something heavy that won't get gross in the water and is completely safe to keep that thing in place. But yeah, pretty simple thing. However, something that's not quite as simple is the water that you're gonna put in it. I did a full video on the waters, which I also have linked in the description. I've done a lot of videos, they're all linked in the description. Go check out that description. But you gotta keep in mind that not everything in your tap water is safe, or whatever type of water you're using. Very quick rundown. If you're using tap water, I suggest something like ReptiSafe, which I have linked. This removes the chlorine, chloramine, and ammonia in the water. If you wanna be a lot more wasteful and use a lot more plastic, you can use bottled water. However, you don't wanna use distilled because this does not have any of the natural minerals in it. I used distilled for about a year and I didn't have any issues, but to avoid any long-term consequences, I stopped using that and went with the tap water with this. You can also boil the water, but that uses a lot of energy. You can use purified water, but yeah, I've talked about all that before. So the most simple thing is if you're using tap water, get a reptile conditioner to remove all of those hazardous things in that water. The cleaner the water, the happier and healthier your animal will be, so change it as often as possible. Daily would be amazing. If you don't change it daily, try and do at least a few times a week. Okay, this is a big one. Now we're going to talk about the temperatures and humidities. First, let's talk about temperatures for your ball python. So ball pythons are snakes. Snakes are cold-blooded. Hopefully you knew that, but because they are cold-blooded, they cannot control their body temperature. So what you want to do is give them lots of different options as to what temperature they can be. The hottest area is best at right around 90 degrees. That's about the temperature that you can find they can bask at in their natural habitat, and it's what a lot of people have done for a long time. So just around 90 degrees Fahrenheit will be perfect for them in that hot spot. What we're going to do is put all of the hot elements on one side, which means that the temperature is going to cool down as it comes to the cold side. The cool side, it really doesn't matter as long as you have that hot spot, because they'll have every temperature in between. But it can be just around 75 degrees. I wouldn't let the enclosure drop below 75. And then at night, you can turn off those main heating elements, but you want to make sure that they don't drop below about 80 degrees at this time. So what I do is I keep my heat mat on at night, so it stays at just around 90 degrees, but they can always move around to different areas if they want to cool off at night. Ball pythons are not basking animals, so please try to use heat mats with your snake. They are by far the best in my opinion for these animals because they are not just going to hang out and come out for a lamp. Although you can potentially use lamps, I really suggest these. It'll help them with digestion, and they'll feel much better because they can hide and stay warm at the same time. You can also think about it with a snake actually basking out in the woods or out wherever. Now they are under the sun, but they're getting most of that heat from whatever they're lying on. If they're lying on a rock, they're soaking up that heat from that rock, which is going to be below them. So that's kind of what this mimics. This is a Zoomed one. I think it's for a 10 to 20 gallon, but it might be a bit too small. If it is, I can upgrade it. You've got lots of different sizes to choose from. Some people say you should try and cover about half the enclosure with a heat mat. That would be a gigantic heat mat. We're going for about a 1/3 of the enclosure or so. With a heat mat under it, it's just fine. A question I get a ton is, where does this actually go? Well, I can show you right now. I don't know if you can see me, but because my hide is on this side, I'm gonna put it over here. Now, you do not want this to go in the enclosure. It goes below the glass. So surface, table, rack, whatever, then heat mat, then the glass, then the substrate, and then the snake. Lots of people get confused and want to put it above the glass and under the substrate. Don't do that, that's not right. It should go under the entire enclosure. Some of these heat mats stick, others just slide into place, but try and get it right around the area of that hide. If you have a larger hide, what I like to do is try and get about half the hide covered so they can even cool off while staying under that same hide. But this is not the only thing you want to do for heating. Lots of heat mats get super hot, and even if you have a substrate barrier between it, the snake can move that substrate and be directly on that glass, which can get really hot in some cases, exceeding 100-something degrees depending on just how hot that mat is. So reptile thermostats are your best friend. There's lots of different thermostats available. This is the Jumpstart thermostat. I've used this one and the Zilla one. There's about 3 others I've seen that I haven't used. I've had great luck with the 2 that I've used, so I have them linked in that kit that you can check out in the description. But it's very simple. All that happens is you take the heat mat and plug it into this thermostat. This thermostat then has a probe. This little probe measures the temperature. You put this probe into place. Try and put it in the hottest place in the enclosure. So what I do is bury it in the substrate so it touches the glass right above that heat mat. And then on this thing, they all work differently, but it'll come with instructions. Just set it to the temperature you want. So I would just set this to 90 degrees. And then when it hits 90 degrees, it'll turn the heat mat off. And then when it goes a bit too cold, it'll turn the heat mat back on. This is a great way to avoid burns and keep your snake at the temperature that it needs. If you have this on like all day and it's never hitting that desired temperature, then your heat mat isn't hot enough and you're gonna need a one with a higher wattage. So again, heat mat goes under the glass. So it's heat mat, glass, substrate, snake. And then the heat mat plugs into the thermostat. So it's heat mat plugs into thermostat, thermostat plugs into wall, probe goes into the place that you want the temperature, and then with the thermostat you set the temperature that you want. Okay, but what about heat lamps? Can I use them? Can I not? Should I? Should I not? Whatever. Well, with lighting, your snake does need light. Some people think it's a good idea to never give their snake lighting just because they're nocturnal, but that's equivalent to you having the sun up 24/7. You have no idea when to rest. You're gonna be confused. Snakes do pretty much follow a sleep schedule. When it gets dark, the reptiles will change their habits, and then when it gets light, it'll change back again. So they know when to get rest, when to be active, when to do whatever. Don't keep a light on all the time. Don't keep a light off all the time. Indirect light works just from your room. Maybe like, well, I'm using studio lights, but if I turned the light on in this room, it could potentially be enough. The snake can see that. They don't require heat lamps though. So if your question was, does my snake need a heat mat? Well, in the case of ball pythons, if you can get the right temperature with just a heat mat, you don't need it. But what I have to do in the winter is add a ceramic bulb or some sort of heat bulb because the room is a bit too cold. So that helps bring the temperature up to the exact point that is needed. But most of the time, most of the months in the year, I can get the temperature with just a mat. Okay, well, what about nighttime bulbs? Can I use one of these infrared bulbs on my ball python? Well, this is an Exoterra heat glow, and I believe it's advertised as infrared. It's not infrared. People get confused because when they see a bulb that's maybe a red or blue color, they think the snake can't see it. Well, they might not see the same colors as us, however, they can still see the light just fine. So if this light is on them and it's too bright, it's going to be bothersome, and it's equivalent to there being the sun up all the time pretty much. So unless you have a super dim bulb, I don't suggest any heat lighting. To be safe, just don't use any. That's my opinion on that. If you're interested in checking up on the temperatures in your enclosure, a great way to do it is with a temp gun. I use the E-Tech City infrared. Someone suggested this to me a good few months ago, and I've been using it a lot. A lot of you have bought it and said that it's helped out a lot. So if you are interested in this, it's linked below with an Amazon link so you can buy it. It's like pretty cheap, like 20 something bucks if I'm right. So go check that out and pick one up if you want to be able to very easily check the temperatures in your enclosure. Remember, don't shine this at your animal or in their light unless you want to blind them. You don't want to blind them. Okay, next thing I'm going to talk about is humidity. This is the amount of moisture in the air. It's measured with a percentage from 0 to 100%, because that's how percentages work. The goal for a ball python is just around 60 to 65% or so. This is more moisture than what's in most people's homes. I know depending on where you live, it's going to be really different. For me in the summer, the humidity in the room is about 50%, and then in the winter it's about 30%. Some of you never have above 10%. Some of you never have below 90%. If you are on the lower side, the substrate's usually going to be enough to get it to the right humidity. You can measure this with lots of different gauges. The one I've been using is a little Paulus one. That's the company that it's from. It's like $5. Very easy and simple to use, so you can go check that out in the kit. But you just put that probe into place. Just try and get it kind of, in an average area, because you want the whole enclosure to be about 60 to 65%. A while back, I dedicated a whole video to increasing and decreasing the humidity in your enclosure. But yeah, the main way is don't let your substrate get super wet, because this can cause issues like scale rot on your animal. However, giving it a very quick spray down here and there when it needs to come up should usually be sufficient. Another great way I found is once the top is on, if you are using an enclosure with a fully screened top, you can cover parts of the screen. I wouldn't cover more than like half of it, but you can put plastic over it, you can put wet rags over it, and things like that can help with humidity too. This is one of the reasons a lot of people suggest using plastic tubs for your snake, because there's just holes drilled into it, so there's less ventilation, enough for it to be healthy, but just a little bit of ventilation so that the moisture stays in the enclosure. Some people say you should never use these aquariums because there's just too much ventilation, but it's worked for me just fine for years. So do whichever one you want, and you can achieve the right levels with both options. Next, let's talk about feeding. This is a few hundred frozen mice. They come in a ton of different sizes. Actually, all of my snakes have to eat different sized mice right now, so it's kind of annoying, but I make it work. So I'm gonna go put these back before they all thaw out. So yeah, ball pythons are usually gonna start on mice, and then as they get larger, they're gonna move on to rats. A lot of people say you should get them on to rats as soon as possible because sometimes it is difficult to get them to switch from one to the other. With my larger ball python, I didn't have any trouble switching them, but yours might be a bit more picky. This also brings up one of the biggest downsides of ball pythons, that being they are often picky and weird about eating, but it is manageable. So the ball python breeding season starts in November and then goes to the start of the year. During this time, it's not uncommon for them to stop eating. So if they are not eating around that time, they're probably completely fine. They also just go off feed at other random times throughout the year if they want. Mine actually rarely do other than that one little breeding season section with my larger one. But if your snake misses a couple meals and it doesn't eat, then that's fine. It's not a huge deal. Some snakes go months and months and months without eating, so it's kind of crazy how long they can go. But if you are getting concerned because they just aren't eating and you've tried a bunch of different things, you might want to consider a vet, but I would just do a bunch of research on possible reasons why it's not eating. Kind of common with ball pythons, they probably go off feed the most compared to other snakes, but it's manageable. But how often should you feed your snake and what size? Well, I feed mine weekly, and if you aren't feeding weekly, the best thing to do is try and get a mouse that has the same girth as the largest part of your snake. So the snake's largest part is usually right around their belly. Try and find a mouse or rat that matches up to that. There's lots of different sizes. They start as small as pinkies, but ball pythons can usually start on hoppers and then move up throughout the sizes as they go. Frozen thawed is always the way to go. I did a video on that with live versus frozen thawed food, but they're pretty easy to find. I just order them in bulk online, or you can buy them in pet stores. It'll just be more expensive because you are buying smaller amounts. But once you find that size that you need, you can just thaw that mouse out. What I do is I just put the mouse in a plastic bag or rat and then put it in warm to hot tap water and then let it sit there for maybe 15 to 20 minutes. Might need to replace the water halfway through, and then just do it until the mouse is at least room temperature, but preferably a bit warmer, because ball pythons don't have great vision. They usually go based on heat. It's good to put them in a bag before you thaw them out, because sometimes you can wash that scent off of the mouse if they're directly in the water. I've been fine both ways, but it's a good way to just have better luck with feeding. Some things you cannot feed your ball python. Firstly, they can't eat vegan diets. Yes, I've been asked. If you've asked, I'm sorry, but they can't. Secondly, they cannot eat just raw meat because it's not gonna have everything they need. A mouse has everything. For example, the bones are gonna give it calcium. This is one of the reasons they don't need any supplements, because that entire rodent is gonna have everything they need. So yeah, feel free to ask more questions about that, but that's really the general stuff on feeding your snake. Also, okay, very important, don't use feeding tubs. Don't move your snake to feed it. Lots of people do this. Just no. Cage aggression, or whatever you want to call it, has never been proven. Therefore, it's a complete myth. In fact, moving it is a worse idea, because that movement back and forth will increase the chances of your snake not eating because it'll freak out or stress out. And also, there's a higher chance it's going to vomit or regurgitate that food when you move them back. Some people just leave them in that separate feeding tub, like overnight or whatever. The problem with this is they're not getting the right temperatures they need. Therefore, they might have more difficulty digesting that food. It's just, I did a whole video on it, also linked below, of course. But long story short, feed your snake in the enclosure. It's way easier. Even if a little substrate gets stuck, as long as you're making good choices, they won't get impacted. They'll just pass it with no problem. Now, it's important to wait a little while after you feed the snake before you mess with it, because the stress on them will bring the chances of them regurgitating the food up, which is not a thing that you want. Now, how long you should wait is really different if you ask different people. Some people say you should wait up to 2 days, others say 1 day, others even say like overnight. It really kind of depends on the snake. Honestly, I can handle my snakes just a couple hours after feeding without problems. Some of them at least. I still don't, just because there's no reason to. It's just best to let them sit and digest. But usually what I say is to wait 24 hours after feeding. If you think it needs longer, go longer, but there's no exact time that they're gonna be like, okay, now I can be held. So just kind of watch your snake and figure it out. But 1 to 2 days after feeding is best. But yeah, you can see we just went over all the care in just about half an hour, so there's really not much to it. Yes, you want to be careful, of course. You want to do the best setup you can, but overall it's a very simple snake, and as long as you did the research, I suggest that you do a lot more research in addition to this video. In case there are things I missed, I just did as much as I could based on my experience and research. Definitely worth getting one. Keep in mind they do live quite a while. They can live up to 30 to 40 plus years. But yeah, a great animal to have, and one of my favorites. So again, you can see the whole written out care guide at GoHerping.com/ballpythons. You can find the kit with all the stuff I used to make this setup in the link in the description. But that's gonna be it. Let me know to leave your tips, leave your other husbandry ideas and stuff you do, stuff you think I should do, ideas of what I should do in the future, whatever, leave whatever you'd like in the comments. But that's gonna be it for this video. So I'm Alex, and thanks for watching.